So basically through my own memories, and which took years to bring up, and they started around about the age of probably around about 27 onwards. I had a near rape situation at 27, which brought up some memories. Then I tried my very best to ignore them and pretend they didn't exist, but they kept leaking through. And by the time I was around 30, 33, the memories were coming up consistently, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. I spoke to an amazing woman called Frida Briggs, who was a child protection advocate in my country of Australia. She helped me to a degree, but a lot of that was just basically self-discovery. I wrote a lot of things down, and I started making statutory declarations to police in 2006 when I was 33, and it just sort of led on from there. My memories came up sequentially in order of horror, so the worst ones came up last, and they tended to be the ones that were the most shame driven, particularly the MK Ultra ones were the ones that I found most difficult to deal with. So I was born into a cult family. So my father is a Freemason, Satanist, Rosicrucian, and he was also an ASIO operative. So ASIO in my country of Australia is the equivalent of the MI6 or CIA. So they're intelligence operatives. He had an old brick kiln turned telecommunications bunker under the shed of our property where I grew up, and he had Morse code and other equipment down there where he would communicate with people. They led to tunnels. Those tunnels led to other bunkers in the area and other underground kilns that had been turned into cold stores and then turned into World War II bunkers in a mandate in 1938. And so I was abused and trafficked through those tunnels to those places as well. So I basically just was born into it, and there was no escape. Okay, so I mean, most of it was sexual abuse by my father and his friends. Some of it was filmed, so he was procuring child rape material. Some of it was worse, so the children were being murdered and he was filming that. Some of the abuse included rituals. There were rituals in forest areas, which I assume was a national park. They were underground, in tunnels, and in various areas too, not just the tunnels that led from my home, but further afield, in people's basements, even in my backyard where I grew up. It happened there as well. Very, very varied. So sadly, there was actually some cannibalism involved. So some of the ritual abuse, the sacrificial children were actually eaten, which is just horrific and very difficult for a lot of people to understand, but this is actually quite common. And one particular ritual, a baby was murdered and then eaten. And there were probably about 50 adults there, and probably around 9 of us children. And people find that very difficult to understand. How is that possible? There would have to be some major conspiracy cover up for all of those adults to keep this quiet. Well, it's a bonding ritual for them all. They all have information on each other. They have this, compromising material. And some of the people that my father was involved in, there's a woman called Debbie Marshall who wrote a book recently called The Banquet about the family murders in my state. Now, the family murders were a series of murders of young boys and young men whose remains were left out to be found, and they were mutilated in many occasions. One person's been incarcerated for that. It's well known, the names of the people who are involved, very high up businessmen, judges, powerful doctors. They've never been brought to justice. So my story of a 50 adults being present is really no big deal. Debbie Marshall also mentioned in her book, Banquet, that my father worked for the Channel 9 studio. Now, he was procuring child rape material. I don't remember that he actually worked there, but I was abused there. So, the abuse was all over the place. So, we're talking many different kinds of child sacrifice, rapes, dismemberment of children afterwards, and cannibalism. Doesn't get much worse than that. So one of the elements of my abuse was I was being studied. So I was being medically studied. I had a lot of electroencephalograms as a child, where you put a cap on the head and there's a lot of electrodes coming out. I was always told that my brain waves were unusual. They didn't understand them, but they kept testing me. There was an organised hit where I was hit off my bike. I assumed it was to kill me. The man who hit me off my bike was staring straight at me as he hit me. He could see me clearly. He said he couldn't. That was absolute rubbish. And my father took me to meet this man afterwards, trying to get me to apologise to him, which I refused to do. But that also led to an enormous number of tests. So they could test my hearing. I had exceptional hearing. They could test my brain waves. They had reason to do operations and procedures to repair my inner ears, which were both busted. And that took three inner ear operations. I don't really know what else was happening while they were doing those things. So, that would have been an opportunity to do other things as well. A lot of the testing that I was put through had to do with psychic ability. So they were particularly fascinated, my father and his cult, with psychic ability, especially in children. And I had gifts, and I actually do that now as a living. I've turned things around because I figure, well, if I've got this ability and I've been trained in it, why not use it for good for me, to benefit myself and others? And that included remote viewing, and what I'm able to tap into transcends time and space. So I can pick up from the Akashic record a person's timeline, past, present, and future, so I can give accurate predictions of the future. And that was something that was also, they're absolutely fascinated by when I was a child. But the experimentation didn't end there. There was also experimentation with prions. So the experimentation was not just the psychic stuff, it was medical as well. So in order to make me comply to what my father, generally was my father that wanted me to do things, I would be told that I would die, but that didn't, after a while, that fear, because I had many near-death experiences and went somewhere lovely when I passed over, or when I felt that I was somewhere else, I didn't have that fear anymore. So then it would be one of my family members would be taken out. Specifically, they would threaten my mother because I was closer to her, or one of my younger family members that I felt protective of, and my pets. So that was another way to make me comply. There were attempts to do things like shame me and threats to make me walk around naked. Those sorts of things didn't worry me. It was worrying about the deaths of the things and people I loved. I don't have signs of DID specifically. I did, up until recently, have an alter that would come through that was very childlike when I had to face authority, and that was very irritating, and I've managed to integrate or have some control over that now. That doesn't occur anymore. There is also another alter that was like I would describe as possibly a super soldier alter, perhaps, something that they were trying to bring out in me that I also have complete control over at this point. I don't know. I'm not aware of many other alters. I think for some reason it wasn't successful. Perhaps they're still there, and I haven't discovered them yet. But there's only my front personality and the other two alters that I'm aware of. Probably the worst experience was the baby ritual that I mentioned earlier. There was another that was much more long-winded and horrible, where a child was kept captive. My father had an underground situation with the house that I grew up in, and he kept a captive for months, on and off. She was brought in and brought out, and he eventually murdered her on or around my 10th birthday, and tried to make me feel complicit in that. So that's probably one of the main memories that I have and experiences that I have that makes me keep fighting and speaking out about this, because he got away with it. So if there was one thing that I wanted to share, it would basically be we need to get this information out there, because children are still being abused. And while we, a lot of survivors find it very difficult to speak out. One of the main reasons why I continue to speak out is because I know this is still happening to children. I know authorities, most of the governments in the world are run by controlled people who've been compromised, whether they are pedophiles or not pedophiles, have been compromised in some way with children. And that's why they've got the positions that they have. And so if we can bring this to light, there's a very good chance that we can stop it from happening. We can protect the children that are still going through the nightmare. And all we really need, as I mentioned before, there's an amazing woman, an advocate for children called Frida Briggs, who's now passed away. And one of the things that she said to me was that we just need one generation of children that don't get sexually abused, and we could pretty much stop the whole scourge of pedophilia, because a lot of pedophiles are created through child abuse.